Hi, everybody. Thanks. You're just clapping because there can't be technical difficulty because I'm here live. That was a great introduction. I'll get started. So I'm Preet Bharara. I used to be the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. You can clap for the office. Sure. I did a lot of things while I was in office. You can be proud of certain things that you accomplished. You can be proud of things that other people have done to you. I was, among other things, criticized personally by President Erdogan of Turkey. I was banned from Russia by, not that guy, but Putin. They changed it. And I was fired by Trump. So sometimes you want to judge a person by their enemies. And I don't mind that so much today. So it's probably not a complete coincidence that Gary invited me here, and I just want to add my own thanks to what Gary has been doing. One of the greatest things that he's done, I think, in a long time, aside from being on my podcast when I was just starting out in the fall. There's no better time for us to be having this kind of conversation in, I think, a frank and stark way. I began my career as a line prosecutor in the Southern District of New York about 18 years ago, and one of the specialties that I had was prosecuting Russian organized crime cases, Eurasian organized crime cases. And then obviously when I became U.S. Attorney, we had a number of cases that involved Russia and crimes committed by people who were operating at Putin's direction. Maybe most famously in 2010, we uncovered the network of 10 Russian secret agents embedded in American society, and I was talking about that backstage with some folks, including Anna Chapman and others. We uncovered the millions of dollars in fraud relating to the work that Bill Browder has done in connection with the Hermitage Fund, and I oversaw the prosecution of notorious arms dealer Victor Boot, which is one of the nominal reasons why I and a bunch of other public servants have been banned from Russia. So there are a lot of experts who have spoken here about a lot of different things. The perspective that I have about a lot of things, most things, is with respect to the rule of law. Bringing cases of international dimension can be difficult. There are challenges, diplomatic challenges on top of all the others. It's hard to bring a case that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, even against someone who's local, who's maybe engaging in the distribution of narcotics. Now you layer in on top of that the possibility of charging people who are politically connected, powerfully connected around the world, and it becomes very, very difficult. For example, there are diplomatic problems. I have never been accused of being a diplomat. That's never been my job. I felt that the job that I had as a law enforcement official was to make sure that we upheld the rule of law, and if you broke the law, no matter who you are, you're not above it, and you should be charged and prosecuted. Even if it's the case, you might not be able to get the body in the United States. And it's against that backdrop that we did all of our work. One quick example, the Russian spy case that I was talking about in 2010, I got briefed on that case. It was a very secretive case. I think the second day after I became U.S. Attorney in August of 2009, and the complaint had been drafted and redrafted and redrafted. And the Assistant U.S. Attorney, Michael Farbiarz, who briefed me on the case once I got all the clearances. In our office, you're supposed to have clearances. It had been sitting in the SCIF for a long time, and you remember at the time there was a talk of reset with Russia, and everyone wanted to have a better relationship with the Russian Federation. And I remember predicting that the likelihood that that complaint against the 10 Russian spies, that would see the light of day was less than 5%. I was proven wrong, but it was a very delicate exercise. Even when we were trying to execute the arrests, in June of 2010, there were questions about whether Medvedev was still in North American airspace, what the precise timing would be. And then with respect to the exchange of spies, at the end, it became a very sort of sensitive matter of law enforcement rule of law versus what was important to America with respect to the safety of spies that we might get in exchange. And it saddens me in particular, given the events in Salisbury, that gentleman and his daughter are now struggling for life in a hospital. So I come from all of this from a law enforcement perspective, whether you're talking about Vladimir Putin or the oligarchs of Russia or anyone else. And I really do think that no one is above the law. And so I thought from my perspective, which is a little different from other people's, I would mention quickly 3 cases that we did in my office that don't bear directly on Putin and some of the other issues being talked about, but give a context for how even sensitive cases have challenges, but also there's some likelihood of bringing certain kinds of cases. So we brought, among other cases when I was in office, a criminal case against the former president of Guatemala. It's not Russia, but Guatemala is a sovereign nation, Alfonso Portillo, for money laundering. He, among other things, laundered money through US banks, and if you launder money through US banks, I believe that remains a crime that should be prosecuted, and we took that very seriously. Among other things, he took bribes from Taiwanese banks to the tune of $1.5 million, and the IRS and the DEA and we together brought a case against him. He had been prosecuted actually in Guatemala and had been acquitted and escaped prosecution. Obviously, what's different in that case from other kinds of cases you might imagine or may salivate over is that Guatemalans themselves had turned against this former president and had cooperated with us and agreed to extradite him to the United States. The point is, money laundering is a serious crime, and money laundering committed by even a head of state or a former head of state is something that Americans from time to time do take seriously and should take seriously if there's a will to do it. Second case quickly, more recent that you may have read about that caused President Erdogan to be upset with my office and with me personally, the case against the United States versus Reza Zarrab, who was a gold trader in Turkey, but Iranian by birth, who was actually charged with similar crimes in Turkey 4 or 5 years ago. And because of the nature of the Turkish state at the time, and because of his associations with President Erdogan at the time, what ended up happening was not the rule of law being enforced, but a turning of the tables. So 1 minute, Reza Zarrab is a criminal defendant in Turkey, and people are doing their jobs. The next minute, the charges are forced to be dropped, and judges are forced to retire, and some of the prosecutors are actually charged themselves, which is why when we unsealed our secret indictment, because Reza Zarrab was arrogant enough to decide to take a vacation at Disney World, which is like, it was a pretty fun place to get arrested. The people of Turkey responded with great favor because they thought that they wouldn't see the day that somebody could be prosecuted if they were powerful or connected to powerful people. I'll remember just, a side note, I think I had 8,000 Twitter followers the day that Zarrab was arrested. And then my dad, I was at a school event, my dad calls me that evening and said, "What's happening to your Twitter account?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You've gained 32,000 followers since this morning, and over the course of the next 2 days on my official account as U.S. Attorney, I got 200,000 followers, 192,000 of which were Turkish." People were offering to send me kebabs. I made it clear to them, which is also ironic, that ethics rules prevented me from accepting even kebabs for doing my job. I also always flew coach when I was a U.S. Attorney. But the point of that story is this is a powerful person who was connected to people from another country, and he ended up hiring what was described as a dream team in the United States, some great lawyers, some of whom I know very well. And at the end of the day, because the rule of law was upheld here, even though, by the way, President Erdogan personally went, and this has been reported, personally went to Vice President Joe Biden, banged his hand on the table and said Preet Bharara should be fired, and wanted that case to be dropped. Yeah, he was a little too early, wrong White House he was talking to. Reza Zarrab, at the end of the day, decided to cooperate, and he ended up testifying as the government's star witness long after I left in a case against his co-defendant. And I'm not saying that President Erdogan should be charged or is going to be charged, but this is why Erdogan didn't want the case to go forward. You had a former associate of his and members of his cabinet testifying in an American courtroom and saying things that were incriminating about the sitting president of Turkey. And I mention that because that's the kind of thing, if everyone has the will and the strength and the courage and the fortuity of getting a witness like that, that's the kind of thing that can happen. Third quick example, in a bizarre case that we brought in the first couple of years that I was a U.S. Attorney against an Iranian national by the name of Mansour Arbabsiar in a plot to assassinate the Saudi Arabian ambassador at a restaurant by bomb at a restaurant in Washington. Now, luckily, that was never on the cusp of happening because we had a confidential informant who happened to be a drug cartel associate who was helping him plan this. But that's a case, again, where we were able to tie the actions of the people that we charged directly back to the Quds Force in Iran to show that it had governmental sanction. So why do I mention these three cases? I choose them because one is about money laundering, one is about the evasion of sanctions, and one is about political assassination. And it is not inconceivable that one or more of those things you could have evidence of, that you could lay at the feet of an associate of Vladimir Putin, or maybe all the way up the chain itself. And the question that I think people in law enforcement need to ask, notwithstanding the diplomatic complexities and issues, is if that happens, if such evidence presents itself, and we've had examples of all of those things, or touching upon all of those things in recent years, and two of those things just this week, when you're talking about an assassination in another country, what are prosecutors in America or in other rule of law countries going to do? Will they have the confidence? Will they have the fearlessness? Will they have the will? And I hope they will. So just in closing, because I know we have a lot of other folks to get to, this conference is about Vladimir Putin, and it's important to talk about potential criminal activity and bad conduct on the part of people from any country, including from Russia. But the other thing I think that's important to think about and talk about, if you care about America and American democracy, is what will it take for President Trump to care as much as I think the average person does? And I'm not talking about the Russia investigation. I'm talking about the kinds of things that it's clear Vladimir Putin is doing to undermine our democracy. Now, what will it take for him to denounce Vladimir Putin? And I don't know what's taking so long. For the longest time, this week notwithstanding, Putin meddles in the election. From Trump, nothing. Congress passes sanctions. From Trump, nothing. Mueller charges 17 Russian entities and individuals. From Trump, nothing. The prospect of Putin meddling in 2018 is, by all accounts, extremely high. From Trump, nothing. The Senate Intelligence Committee says it's likely to expected that Russia will try to sow chaos. Nothing. Attorney General Sessions himself says we're not doing enough to prevent Russian interference in U.S. elections. Nothing. Russian actors poison UK citizens with a little-known Soviet-developed nerve agent. And for the longest time until this week, when he was basically boxed in, nothing. This is a man who, by the way, is happy to criticize people with disabilities, widows, ailing families, American veterans, and prisoners of war, who you can't keep off Twitter. And when it comes to, I'm not saying anything new, but I think it's worth repeating, when it comes to Vladimir Putin, nothing. And so you have to wonder about this sort of slow takeover of Donald Trump's mind, the President of the United States. In the end, I do believe that there are ways to fight back against both autocracy and criminal conduct and interference with other nations' work. One is the Magnitsky Act, and I'm very excited to have a conversation at the end of the session with Bill Browder and talk about how ordinary citizens, I mean, I used to be a prosecutor. I'm a private citizen now. There's a lot private citizens can do. Just look at Bill Browder. And so at the end of the day, whether Putin is or is not a criminal, he is without a doubt a spoiler, a spy, a meddler, a propagandist, and Trump doesn't seem to mind. I tweeted out this last week, Vladimir Putin could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and he wouldn't lose Donald Trump's vote. It's enough on occasion after occasion for Donald Trump to say, when talking about his friend Putin, well, Putin vehemently denies it. And that's sort of the end of the story if you ask Donald Trump. To me, that's about as feeble as it gets. Of course, he says the same kind of thing, he vehemently denies it, about any odious ally or friend found credibly accused of anything. Luckily, for prosecutors and for everyone else who believes in the rule of law, he vehemently denies it is not the end of the story. Thanks very much. I'll keep these on? Okay.
You can go out there.
Okay.
I'm Boris Richest from Germany, and the connection to Moscow has been interrupted, and it took some German knowledge to get it back. And I hope now with German help you get New York and Moscow connected again.
Conference.
It is important that the wide international audience is aware of the criminal nature of the existing regime in Russia. The conference is the major step in this direction. For a number of years, I and my team have been exposing the system of political and economic corruption put in place by Vladimir Putin and his cronies. This system has robbed my fellow Russian citizens of over $1 trillion of revenues from oil and other natural resources. It has put vast part of the national economy in the hands of corrupt oligarchs and corrupt state capitalists. It has turned the political system into a rubber stamping machine operated by a close circle of Putin loyalists and the law enforcement agencies into instruments of political persecution and corporate raiding. It is the system of corruption that has fueled Putin's aggressiveness abroad. Western countries can do much more to fight Russia-related corruption. First of all, within their borders. The legislation enabling the political system into a rubber stamping machine operated
technique didn't work, you see, with the Russian cyber attack, even we Germans. It's not because we are so Putinized in Germany, it's just our technology is not so good anymore, unfortunately. So we will start with, it's too fast, this cyber attack is incredible, so maybe we can get the first picture. Anyway, in the first picture, oh, great! With love, yes, we have it, and it's Europe. Why? It's Europe. I've been living in 16 years in Moscow as a journalist. That explains my bad English, I hope. And why I show you Europe. When I met a former high-ranking official of Putin, who's now an enemy of Putin, he said to me, "Boris, you make one big mistake. You always say that Putin is not a European." I said, "Of course he's not a European." He says, no. You're too focused on Central Europe. You have to focus on a small little island in the very south of Europe, on Sicily. And if you focus on Sicily, then you can say that Putin is a European because he's a Sicily European. He's not a socialist, he said, he's a Sicilist. So it's one big family. And if we are speaking of one big family, we have to get our main figure in Europe, Gerhard Schröder, former chancellor, and he succeeded in what Adolf Hitler didn't. He made it into the Russian dictionary. Because you have now the foreign word Schröderization in the Russian dictionary. Schröderizacja, it means the corruption of a political elite in another country. It began with children. Putin helped him to adopt 2 children, what would have been easy in Germany by legal means because he's too old. And so Putin found his approach in contrast, for example, to the Austrian president, which got 2 small dogs from Putin. So he finds his approach to everyone. And it was a great exchange because later Putin gave Putin a relief of 7.1 billion euros debt, and he just canceled them for Russia. He was lobbying the Nord Stream pipeline, and in the final weeks of his terms, he granted Gazprom a loan guarantee worth more than €1 billion. I remembered the old words of Vladimir Lenin, who said that the capitalists, they will sell us the rope which we will hang them. And in this case, we even give them the loan for buying the rope. And nowadays we can make a Schröder test always when some Western politician says some things who are even too stupid for Western politicians, which can be only invented by the Kremlin. We know that something is wrong. For example, Schröder accused Ukraine of attacking itself in the East Ukraine, which I think is from the Kremlin propaganda machine and not from himself. He's not alone in Germany. He has many friends. This one is the day before yesterday became Interior Minister of Germany, former Prime Minister of Bavaria, great friend of Putin. Why? He has a huge oil refinery in his hometown. It was bankruptcy, and who helped him to save the working spaces in his hometown? Vladimir Putin. And I'd rather spare you all the pictures I have to show you now, because it's not so nice to look all these faces, but the organization team asked me to show them to you. So let's face the truth. Silvio Berlusconi, there are some reports about him getting cuts out of oil deals, of gas deals, and for example, he's famous of saying to a prostitute that he's waiting for her in the bed Putin gave him as a present. I don't know why he thought it could turn them on, but we don't know it. We have again a cyber attack. It's moving itself. So here we have Marie Le Pen, 15 million euro loan from Putin, and voting against the Grim resolution in the European Parliament. We have Miloš Zeman, the Czech president, which defended Putin, saying that there are no Russian troops in the Crimean, when even Putin already said that he has his troops there. And sometimes the connection is not so good as you've seen today. And one of his advisors, for example, was saved by oil from bankruptcy. You have it in Finland. It's Paavo Lipponen, same story, Nord Stream advisor, former prime minister, social democrat with huge connection to Moscow, and we could go on for a very, very long time and it would be boring. And so let's just have one look to America. You have your own mini Schröder, very mini. It's Dana Rohrabacher from California, which sounds sometimes like a loudspeaker of Vladimir Putin, but you should investigate himself. We are busy enough to investigate the European connections, so please, let's leave this guy to you. So the overview for Europe, I made a small one for you, the connections, why it is so small. So little pictures. If I would give you the whole picture, you would see something like this. This is the lower part is connections to Germany, or I would give you something like this. This is German media, which is connected to Russia. You see, it would be for a 5-hour speech or for all day. And so let's not go into detail. Let's go to some of the key figures. This is Putin's chief ideologist, so-called, Alexander Dugin. He says that I despise and reject the degenerate pseudo-Europe. He says that all Ukrainians have to be killed. He says we need a third Roman Empire under Russian leadership, and Europe should be a protectorate which Russia defends from homosexualism and other illnesses. And he also says very open that we, Russia, have already troops on the other side of the front line, and he says the 5th column is already there in Europe. He says this very openly. And the mastermind behind them, it's Konstantin Malofeev. He is called the Orthodox oligarch. To tell the truth, he was not very faithful he was under crime suspicion. And when the investigation was running, he found God. And God helped him, as we see, because he became a millionaire. And sometimes it's very helpful to pray, even in Russia, but better to pray to Putin than to God. And they have some spiritual connection. And he says very openly what he's fighting for. He says, I'm fighting for Eurasian Union under Orthodox Russian leaderships, because he says all Western values are godless and atheistic. Remember Eurasian Union? And let's look at Germany, what is going on there. And everyone expected in Germany a huge propaganda attack before the elections, like we had it in USA. Like we had it in France, and already our parliament was hacked and everything was prepared. Why he didn't do it? He did not have to, because he already won the German election in September before the election took place. From 7 parties who made it into the parliament, 5 are more or less pro-Putin. And so he had no reason to interfere in the last stage of the parliamentary election. And I would even say in Germany we have something what's Sovietologists called Finlandization. Finlandization, it means the example of Finland in the Cold War, which was very neutral and very positive towards Moscow. And so sometimes I wonder why we try to fight propaganda when our foreign minister, until today, Sigmar Gabriel, gives interviews to Russia Today. And by the way, the day before yesterday, he also said that this Skripal attack, this murder attempt, that we should not blame Putin for this, former German chancellor. I think I don't have to mention that he's a close friend of Gerhard Schröder. And remember I told you about Malofeev, this key figure in Putin's fight about Eurasian Union, which he wants. And now we have a coalition in Germany against Social Democrats and Christ Democrats. And guess what's inside the coalition agreement? We want to have a Eurasian unit. So it's really, really hard in Germany, and I think we have lost in Germany, we have lost our immunity, we have lost our understanding of democracy. People do not make a difference anymore between dictatorship and democracy, you know? They don't get it, and you have to tell them that it's like a difference between a hotel, democracy, hotel, maybe USA, with a crazy director, with bugs in the beds, which is run down, bad condition, but still it's a hotel, and the alternative is a jail. And people in Germany don't get this difference between democracy and dictatorship. Not all of course, but many of them. And so I think the main problem, or one of the main problems, it's ourselves, that we are not understanding our values so well anymore. And let me finish on this. In Germany, these huge connections of Gerhard Schröder, who made Germany dependent on Russian gas, on Russian oil. It's no big issues in the media, but when the former president, Christian Wulff, was granted an upgrade in a hotel for 700 euros. 3 years he was sued in court, and it was the main issue in the media, and we lost our compass, and that makes it so easy for Putin. It's not Putin who is so strong, we got so weak. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello. My name is Nikita Kulachenkov. I'm the member of the investigations team at the Anti-Corruption Foundation, founded by Alexei Navalny. He's tried to say a few words with no significant success. I hope I'm going to be more successful in that. My topic is about Putin's business accomplices. And as you know, Mr. Putin never been in business. There was only one document, I think, signed by him, found somewhere in early zeros in Germany, and then the story disappeared, and we don't know if it's true or not. So he always served as the government official. We also know that some of his old friends from the Ozero cooperative became the dacha, his friends from his dacha became very rich during his years as a president. But this is also not the case here. I would like to talk about those who are not his close friends, and we don't know that they are his close friends. But they are also very important, and these are the business people who help the regime, even if they are not the friends or close allies of Putin. Yep. So, well, basically, this is what I was trying to say about the business accomplices. Those who are not close friends of him, but who are still helping him in his work as the president and in his policies he is running for the country. So we can clearly say that the Russian business, especially those middle level and top level, like oligarchs and the big business in Russia, is clearly serving the political needs. It's a question whether they do that voluntarily or it's a mandatory task for them, but we can see that, and here are the examples. The domestic needs. For example, we have identified the luxury empire of the now Prime Minister Medvedev that is built based upon the non-governmental and non-for-profit organizations that provide a luxury lifestyle for him. Where are the money coming from? The money is coming from the oligarchs who make donations to these non-for-profits, and accordingly these non-for-profits organizations buying mansions, vineyards in Italy, some businesses and so on. So the business, well, good example. In 2007, the partly state-owned Gazprom Bank has the second largest loan given to some other party, and this party was a non-governmental organization. This was audited by the Big Four company, I don't remember the exact name of the company, but it was audited and they just highlighted that, but asked no question. Why would one of the largest bank given $400 million to the non-for-profit as the loan? Well, they gave it to build a mansion for Mr. Medvedev. The other example is pretty straightforward. The financial support for the political activities of the United Russia and personally Putin's election fund. As far as we know, during this presidential campaign, the Putin's election fund was at the top level allowed by law, and there were 3 private donations there. Only 3 people who are private individuals decided to donate something, and it was just an immaterial amount comparing to the whole amount donated, and the whole amount donated was, the donations came from the business accordingly, from Timchenko, who is his close old ally, and from other businesses. So these are the other domestic need. Forced voting by employees. I pointed this because there's going to be a vote on this this weekend. So as far as we know from yesterday's news, for example, the head of the Russian state corporation Rosneft, it's partly state, partly owned by the state. So Mr. Sechin issued an internal order in his corporation that all employees should go and vote, and there are special units controlling that all of the employees will go to vote for during that elections. Whatever their vote will be, but not the case. Another example: financing state important projects like Olympics in 2014. The state authorities claimed that most of the money are coming from the businesses. This is from the business in order to build the Olympics venues, but these businesses did not voluntarily invest it into Olympics venues because most of them are non-profitable and they will never be able to get money out of them properly. However, they provided some money, they received some tax deductions or rather benefits. All of them were successful, and some of those who participated in the construction of the Olympics venue are now bankrupt. But anyway, they were asked to do that. External needs in terms of the external policies. Economical pressure. There were a few words about the Gazprom already today, and I can only say that during these 15 years of, 18 years of Putin's Putin being the head of the state, Gazprom was not serving the needs of shareholders. It was serving the needs of the state. Well, this is why there is a significant decline in their stock market value, and they have higher debts, and this corporation is not doing pretty well in terms of the financials, in terms of its financials. However, they can influence the politics in Ukraine, for example, or trying to negotiate something with the Ukraine, saying that we will stop using your pipes for transferring of gas to Europe. And the same happens in Europe, basically. Lobbying and influence through through ownership. Many of the Russian oligarchs have investments in other countries like football clubs. It not necessarily influence the politics, but it somehow influence the public opinion. They might use their funds to pay the lobbyists to execute that kind of influence. And the final two examples are elections meddling. I'm going to talk a bit more about that, saying a few words about Mr. Deripaska, but I think most of the United States person here has heard about the connections between the employee of the Trump's elections office and one of the Russian oligarchs. Another example is Syria, where the so-called Putin's cook, or the person who used to cook something for Putin and accidentally became very rich, is providing the mercenaries for Syria military activities. He also got some profit out of that because he's trying to run the oil fields in Syria with no large success. But anyway, he's the businessman, but he's serving the political needs abroad. Yeah, this is the nice picture taken somewhere on vacation, and here you can see one of the richest men in Russia, Oleg Deripaska, and the deputy prime minister Prikhodko, responsible for foreign relations. That happened. This picture is taken 2 months after Mr. Deripaska talked to Mr. Manafort, and Manafort provided some private briefings. Why I'm talking about the Mr. Deripaska? Well, he is the owner of the major metallurgical company in Russia, and the second largest market for this aluminum company is United States. I think they have more than 1 billion of sales in last year in United States. So you can't just, if we mention the word sanctions, you can't just sanction this person because it's going to be a problem with the supplies of aluminum in United States. But this person is clearly serving the political needs of the regime and Putin personally. Allegedly, he suffered a lot in 2008 crisis, and he was on his way to bankruptcy, and the state provided the support to his companies. He was not the only one who received that kind of support, but it seems that he should be in debt in front of the regime, in front of Putin. Yeah, the story about the Manafort and Deripaska. As I said, 2 months after Mr. Deripaska met with Manafort, and this is the proven fact, we found in social media, we found the posts by escort ladies, sorry about that, who were on the yacht as well together with them. There were a few of them, and one of these ladies posted on her Instagram this particular picture we have seen on the previous slide. She also described what they were discussing and made some recordings, and they were discussing United States and Russia relations, which is pretty interesting if it's the oligarch and the deputy prime minister responsible for foreign policies and foreign relations. What else is doing Mr. Deripaska? It's not I can't say that it's proven, but a few months ago in autumn, one of his companies went public on the London Stock Exchange. He sold 10% of his stake, receiving around $1 billion. And it seems, we have not yet seen the financial statements, it seems that this is pretty the same amount that Mr. Deripaska owns to the Russian state-controlled bank VTB that is under sanctions and can't attract financing. So it's like he's trying or helping, I'm not sure about that, but he's trying to help, he's trying to avoid sanctions or help the VTB to avoid sanctions. And another important point, it's like says, who is the boss of Mr. Deripaska? What has surprised the escort ladies? This particular one lady talks a lot about that. They noticed that Mr. Deripaska is treating this deputy prime minister as his boss, which is pretty strange because Mr. Deripaska is one of the richest men in Russia. He's on his own yacht, and still the deputy prime minister, not Putin, not, I don't know, Medvedev, not Sechin, we're going to talk about him as well, is like his boss. And this explains a lot, because he is really his boss. And Mr. Deripaska and other oligarchs, shareholders of the large companies, executives, are not really the owners of what they have. I'm going to say a few words about that later as well. This is the nice man, yeah, this picture is from his video he recorded as an answer to the allegations by Alexei Navalny, and his motto in this video was, "I spit on you, Alexei." That's how he used to talk with his opponents, as I understand. If I are using the right word for spit, I think it's the proper word, yeah. So his name is Alisher Usmanov. He's also one of the richest men in Russia, and he is owner of the largest metallurgical company, well, in Russia in particular, in the world as well, one of the largest. Well, he's, as he says, he's the man that he's made himself, but they usually say something like that. But he used to be in the prison in early 80s during the Soviet years for racketeering. Officially, this is stated like that. He was, after that, I think, prison term, he always received some accusations of the criminal connections. But he was just a middle-level businessman at the early 80s. But there are two important things. His wife was the trainer of Alina Kabaeva. And again, allegedly, Alina Kabaeva is now the girlfriend of Mr. Putin. Also, in late 90s, Mr. Usmanov became the executive at the Gazprom investment vehicle. Not exactly in Gazprom, but it's in the Gazprom subsidiary that was responsible for investments. And as we have investigated, it seems that Mr. Usmanov became one of the richest men in Russia and in the world in particular by using the Gazprom money. He was investing them. If this investment succeeded, he is privatizing gains. If this investment is not successful, he is sending the losses to Gazprom. So this is how he acquired the large stake in this metallurgical company, and finally that made him a really, really rich person. Another funny fact about him, he was the significant investor in Facebook and Twitter. He's no longer have any material stake in them, but together with the US-based businessman of the Russian origin, Yuri Milner, he again, allegedly using the Gazprom money, he invested in Facebook and in Twitter. Both of these investments were highly successful. Another person, next picture. Yeah, this is Mr. Sechin, who is not the, as far as we know, who is not the shareholder of a significant shareholder of any company, but he is holds the executive position in Rosneft, the largest oil and gas company in Russia. And before his successful career of becoming the executive of Rosneft, there is a famous video of young Putin moving from St. Petersburg to Moscow, accordingly to Kremlin, and to Moscow in particular. And Mr. Sechin is carrying his suitcase behind, like with his personal belongings, as I understand. So he used to be a secretary of Mr. Putin at his early years, but as soon as Mr. Putin became the president and head of FSB, then the president, Mr. Sechin made a successful career. He was in the presidential administrator, then he was a deputy prime minister in the government, and finally, since 2012, he is the head of Rosneft. It's the partly state-owned Russian oil company. What we know about Rosneft activities? Rosneft increasing production levels, extraction of oil is increased, but this is not increased like you extract more oil from the same hole in the ground, but you just raid the other companies on the market, and using your influence and the help of the security services, you just seize the other companies. So now you have 3 drills, yeah, instead of 1, and you say to Putin, yeah, the company is running well because I made the production doubled, but it's not because the company is going well, because of the raiding of the property or oil wealth of the other companies. If we look at the financials, the Rosneft is in great indebtedness, and it's not doing well if we look at the other numbers. So the idea is that he's not really good manager, it seems to. He's an extraordinary person, but not a good manager in the oil company. But even though the company is not running well, if we look in the details, is, I think, one of the most highly paid executives in the world. On the previous slide, this one, he's paid not 13,000, but $13 million a year officially. And for example, he bought a yacht for his young wife. He has divorced already, but he bought a yacht for his young wife for $100 million. I don't think that there is a mortgage on this yacht, but it's a significant amount for just the top level, even for the top level executive of the oil company. The salaries and benefits of the top level executives of the other major international oil companies are twice or 3 times less, usually. So also, there were fun facts about him when Rosneft officially, through the formal bidding procedure ordered golden spoons for Mr. Sechin's helicopter that is somewhere in Siberia. So it's not his helicopter that he's using every day. He's just coming to Siberia from time to time, and he needs the golden spoons on the helicopter. So the state company is purchasing these golden spoons. Well, they finally canceled because of the civil society disseminated this information, and they said, okay, let's have silver spoons or platinum spoons, whatever. So the other point, which this is my personal one, the year and a half ago, they made the untransparent deal of selling the 14% stake in Rosneft, and it was structured really, really untransparent, and this deal involved Chinese investors, involved United Arab Emirates investment, and the facilitator was one of the facilitators. Basically, was the Italian Intenza bank with strange reputation. Well, what I think, I have no evidence about that, but it seems that this deal was structured this way because it was made after the sanctions were already imposed on Rosneft, on Sechin personally. They structured it the proper way to keep some shares for themselves. And even if I don't know, Putin will fly away somewhere, they will have some kind of reserve. I have no evidence about that. It's just what I'm thinking they really done in that case. Maybe it's a conspiracy, but I wanted to say that. The last person is going to be quick. The last person, well, a nice guy, basically, named Anatoly Chubais. He is the bit different example here. He was in the government from late 80s, and he was from the old so-called liberal avant-garde team that included Mr. Sobchak, the mayor of St. Petersburg at that time, Boris Nemtsov, and other prominent Russian politicians of that era. He was in the government in the 90s, top deputy prime minister or something like that, well, minister in the government at that years. Then in the early Putin's years, he moved and headed the state corporation for electricity. I don't know the right term for the, like supplying the electricity to consumers from the generating unit to consumers, RAO, yes. There was a reform, and from several points of view, the reform was really successful. But then he moved to the company named Rosnano, responsible for developing the innovation nanotechnologies in Russia. And it's just not that successful as the electricity production, because basically what happened is the state gave them a huge amount of money, and they put that in the bank, and for the next 10 years they just lived on the interests from this huge amount. It's a bit a simplification, but they were not very successful in the investments, and those investments we have investigated, we've seen as a special scheme. The managers of Rosnano, maybe not personally Chubais, founded some innovative companies that were in trouble. Like the original investors spent their own money or loaned some money, and then they understood that it seems that the project will not succeed. So they let's call Russian Rosnano because they will save us. So the old investors exit the project. Rosnano is investing the money into this not really successful project, but who cares? It's the state money, so no problem at all. Yeah. Okay, yeah, they're telling me that I have to stop. Okay, I will switch to the final words. Chubais is not the worst person in this list, as I personally think, but finally, what I was trying to say, that the Russian oligarchs, the shareholders, they are not the actual owners of what they have. And they all clearly understand that in any single day, because the Putin will fly away, or the Putin will change his mind, they're going to lose everything. So they do whatever they are asked to satisfy him. Or they will do whatever they will be asked, or whatever they think is needed to delay this single day when they will lose everything. And that relates not only to their Russian wealth and Russian assets. That relates also to the assets in the foreign country, and they cannot hide even if they transfer the money outside, because if the regime is changing, and it's someday it will change, they might lose everything. So now they will meddle elections, involve in Syria, whatever, bribe the government officials in other countries, trying to spend significant amounts on lobbying. They will do everything to delay this single day when the Putin will go somewhere or something will happen. Thank you. Hope it was not too long.
The next talk will be translated. Please put on your headset. If you need a headset, raise your hand and someone will pass one to you shortly. The power button is on the side at the top, and the volume buttons are directly below that. Ensure that your headset is set to channel 1.
Уважаемые участники, здравствуйте. Я хотела бы представить вам небольшой доклад, содержащий некоторые факты из жизни сегодняшнего президента России Путина, бывшего сотрудника КГБ и ФСБ, а также поговорить о его подельниках, по так называемому бизнесу и о фактическом захвате власти в России в 1999 году. Я являюсь дочерью одного из ближайших подельников Путина, ректора Главного института Литвиненко, ректора из списка Forbes, его теневого кассира. Я являлась депутатом Санкт-Петербургского парламента с 2007 года. Участвовала в каждом штабе по выбору президента Путина 3 раза в 2000-2004 году. Занимаясь политикой, я общалась с очень многими подельниками Путина, наблюдала за этой деятельностью и имела доступ большому количеству и объему информации, которую хотел с вами, частью которой хотел с вами поделиться. В 90-х годах Россия была совершенно другой страной. Это была страна с молодой демократией, только что сбросившей с себя путы тоталитарного коммунизма. И с провалом ГКЧП банда КГБ утратила свое влияние. Естественно, данное преступное сообщество очень хотело получить свою власть обратно. Этого можно было бы избежать, если бы тогдашнее правительство приняло закон о люстрации, но на это не хватило политической воли. Поэтому стало возможным внедрение во власть, как часть долгоиграющей спецопераций, таких чекистов, как Путин. Используя свое служебное положение, они начали формировать необходимый в дальнейшем капитал, который требовался для осуществления им фактически произошедшего в России в 1999 году государственного переворота. 6 марта я присутствовал на конференции в Риге, организованной одним международным фондом. С большим удивлением и изумлением я услышала о том, как на полном серьезе один известный политик озвучил мнение, что якобы в 2000 году Путин честно пришел к власти. Наверное, устал народ от демократии, от реформ, и, наверное, вдохновил чекист, невнятно бубнящий о диктатуре закона, который собирался установить в одной отдельно взятой стране. Видимо, чем-то он якобы вдохновил народные массы. Хотя на самом деле это не так. Я возразил на этой конференции. Приход Путина к власти, особенно в Петербурге, воспринимался очень неоднозначно. В Петербурге Путина не любили, потому что все прекрасно помнят в Петербурге. Значит, все прекрасно помнят в Петербурге то, как Путин брал взятки, при участии его секретаря-референта Сечина. В отличие от всей страны, в Петербурге многие знали, кто такой на самом деле Путин, и любви к нему особо не испытывали. Доклад Марины Салье, разоблачающий публикации Шутова, бросающийся в глаза коррупция в органах исполнительной власти, где основным решальщиком вопроса был как раз Путин, подстраховываемый Сечиным, все это очень ярко бросалось в глаза. Естественно, было необходимо сделать так, чтобы как раз именно в своем родном городе, в Петербурге, Путин набрал очень хороший процент.
Putin in his home city would take a lot of votes. So, for that, my dad, who happened to be his friend and the author of his thesis, which later on was branded as a fake thesis. So I participated in the work of the first election headquarters. They resorted to such methods as using people who recently deceased, and they used to employ students to hang out leaflets. However, the trust from KGB was justified in St. Petersburg.
Оценив способность фабриковать необходимый результат, ректор Горного так и продолжали назначать руководителем штаба. Он практически стал бессменным. А Горный институт являлся бессменным штабом. Падение престижа несменяемого фабрикатора результатов выборов произошло в 2018 году. Когда появилось слишком много обличающей информации о том, как стены технического вуза, старейшего технического вуза России превратились в стены коррупционного учреждения. Сразу после восхождения на первую ступень на должность премьер-министра Путин и его подельники занялись душением свободных СМИ, преследованием главных политических оппонентов, и первой жертвой политической как политический оппонент, явился Юрий Шутов.
The first victim was Yuri Shutov.
Потом уже стали такие знаковые фигуры, как Березовский.
He was followed by Berezovsky,
Проверив на них
Khodorkovsky.
реакцию собственного народа и
After
мировой
checking
общественности,
the response of Russian people and the international community
решили продолжить дальше.
to that, they
Один
decided
из
to
ярких
continue.
примеров незаконного
One
передела
of
собственности
the
является
examples
фактически рейдерский
of
захват с использованием государственного аппарата,
Was the use of the government machine and
и сейчас является сверхприбыльный актив, который сейчас принадлежит компании «Фосагро», заправляют которым подельники Путина, теневые кассиры, Горев, Антошин и мой отец Литвиненко.
Run by Gorев, Antoshin,
Почему же
and
стала
my dad
возможной эпоха
Litvinenko?
Путина?
Why
Как я уже говорила,
was
непринятие закона о
the Putin
люстрации,
era possible? As I said,
если бы его приняли, такие
the
приспешники
law
Путина,
on
как
vetting
Матвиенко,
government
сотрудники
officials
КГБ, Сечин,
was not adopted. And
Полтавченко
if it
и
was
Бунин
adopted,
не
then
пришли бы к власти.
Putin's friends like Sechin, Matvienko, and others would not come to power.
Значит, так, прошу прощения. Путин начал свою карьеру в Ленинграде
Putin
после
began his
возвращения из
career
Германии
in
в
St.
качестве
Petersburg
начальника
after he
особого отдела
returned from Germany,
Госуниверситета.
and he
Основным его
was the
основным
chief of a special
помощником тогдашнего
unit at
председателя
the
Ленсовета Собчака
university.
являлся Шутов. После
Shutov
того, как
was
с Собчаком стал
his,
работать Путин,
was
Шутов превратился
the
в
assistant
его
of
личного.
Sobchak, who was the mayor
Шутов
of
продолжает свои
Leningrad.
разоблачительные расследования о
Shutov
приватизации отдельных комплексов Петербурга,
continued
отельных
to
комплексов Петербурга,
investigate
такие как
the
Прибалтийская,
criminal
Невский палас, Астория, которые впоследствии
activization of
стали
major hotels in
собственностью
St.
Путина.
Petersburg, which later on became
Через
Putin's
аффилированные
property
структуры,
through
и через
affiliated
подставных
structure
лиц.
and through cover
Путин и
companies.
его подельники постоянно
Putin
пользовались
and
услугами
his
петербургских
associates
бандитов.
continued to
Симбиоз
use
бандитов
the
КГБ был
efforts
всегда,
of
потому что они прекрасно дополняют
St.
друг друга.
Petersburg
И
bandits.
Владимир Путин тому пример.
The union between KGB
Бандиты были
and the
более отчаянными, а ГБшники всегда
continued for a
умели
long
работать с
time.
информацией. Это банда.
KGB guys knew how to deal with the
В 90-е
information,
годы в
and
Петербурге
the
произошло много
bandits
нераскрытых
were
убийств
always
бизнесменов.
reckless.
Собственники
In the
активов убитых
90s, there were
предпринимателей
many
становились все те же бандиты,
assassinations
работающие с бывшими сотрудниками КГБ и
uninvestigated
Путина.
by
При
business
содействии Путина был
people.
создан бизнес Кумарина, ПТК,
Putin
крупнейшая
helped
сеть
to
автозаправочных станций в
establish
Петербурге
the
и области.
business of Mr.
Сосед Путина по
Kumarin,
кооперативу «Озеро»
and
Смирнов
Putin's
стал
neighbor
президентом
in
Петербургской топливной
Ozero
компании.
Coop became the chairman of
В
the St.
1998 году,
Petersburg
незадолго
Fuel
до выборов в
Company.
парламент Петербурга, в Петербурге происходит убийство Галины Старовойтовой.
There
Убийство,
was the
заказанное ФСБ
assassination
для
of
того, чтобы
Galina Starovoytova
расшатать политическую
in
ситуацию.
St.
Так
Petersburg
как в это
prior
время
to
происходило расследование таких
1998
уголовных
elections.
дел, громких, в которых был замешан Собчак, Путин, Кудрин, такое как дело 20-го
requested
треста.
by FSB to destabilize
Парламент
the
проходила
political
команда,
situation.
поддерживаемая губернатором Яковлевым, и команда, поддерживая Болдыровым. Это усилило бы позиции нормальных независимых сотрудников, таких как Андрей Языков, проводившие эти расследования. Парламент был государственным органом, который бы взял под свой контроль эти расследования и не позволил бы путинским людям закрыть дела. Путин очень боялся этого. Но выборы все-таки состоялись, и в новый парламент был заинтересован в продолжении подобных расследований.
The parliament wanted to continue the investigations.
И далее
Shutov was elected as a deputy in 1998, and then his team of investigators continued to investigate the case of 20th Trest. As soon as Putin became the prime minister, Shutov was arrested. Recently, the chief editor of New Petersburg newspaper was beaten up, and then he was assassanated, and the newspaper changed its direction. There is an interesting document, like a police report on Putin. It came to attention in the summer of 1999. According to mass media, Putin was getting kickbacks from the company which was involved in servicing burial procedures, and that business was associated to Kostya Могила, criminal nickname Grave, and his associate is now in Israel. Putin was involved in illegal export of
Депутатская комиссия Ленсовета во главе с Марией Салье пришла к выводу, что из Петербурга за границу уходили природные ресурсы по экспортным лицензиям, подписанные на тот момент Путиным. Цена вопроса, по мнению депутатов, не менее 100 миллионов долларов. Практически всю фактуру для комиссии Салье первая жертва Путина через заместителя Гладков. Гладков умер от очень странной болезни. Махинации Путина с бюджетными деньгами 20-го треста, отмывание денег в Испании. В начале 2000-х годов прогремело расследование уголовного дела 144-128 в Петербурге. 20 октября 1992 года в Комитете по внешним связям мэрии Санкт-Петербурга, который возглавлял, напомню, Путин, была зарегистрирована частная строительная корпорация 20 Корпорация взяла кредит из бюджета Петербурга около 34 миллионов долларов. Все эти деньги были выданы в виде кредитов из бюджета. В документах, из документов видно, что там участвовали Путин, Кудрин,
the documents show that Putin and Manevich were involved in that
на некие мегапроекты типа башни Петра, где сейчас находится пустырь, он так и не был построен.
They also allocated money for a construction of St. Petersburg Towers, and that project has never been built.
Деньги осели в Испании, в конечном
And
итоге.
eventually the money was traced to Spain, and then the director of 20th Trust, and Nikeshin, who was a deputy of this city parliament,
на то, чтобы на деньги, которые осели в Испанию, построили отель «Ла Палома». И, соответственно, чтобы в нем люди проходили так называемое санаторно-курортное лечение. То есть такая большая долгоиграющая схема. В 1999 году
they wanted to arrest Nikeshin in the building of the city parliament, but he was able to hide in the office of another member of the parliament, and he called Putin from there, and then investigators left. In 1999, Putin made my dad involved in a scientific project. He became the director of the St. Petersburg Mineral Resources Institute, and they set up a business of preparing thesis for anybody who would pay for that. Putin's commercial activities were quite versatile. There was a system of kickbacks with Putin's involvement, and that also included Mr. Sechin. Everything was channeled through Mr. Sechin.
Ректор создал молодежную организацию «Жизнь молодая», которую мне было сказано возглавить и отыскивать талантливую молодежь.
In 1996, the rector of the institute suggested to look for young people who would be employed at the troll factory. The same thing was happening with Mr. Prigozhin. So, for his involvement in that scheme, Kiryanov received an apartment as a gift. I know that Litvinenko, my dad, is one of the individuals who financed the troll factory as ordered by Kremlin, and he is doing that using revenue from Agra, which is registered at the London Stock Exchange, and Antoshin and Goliev are running that company together with him, and one of them is in the Kremlin list. So many of them are buying real estate in foreign countries, including Cyprus and London, and I'm about to close. So the people like Yakunin, Ivanov, and Patrushev, Golubov, Sechin, Bortnikov, the so-called collusion, together with Putin, it is them who established dictatorship in Russia and leading it to bankruptcy and to opposition with the whole world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hi, Bill.
Hi. Preet, let's start out. I want to apologize to you.
Okay, I like apologies.
Okay. As you know, because of all of my efforts to get the Magnitsky Act passed here, you can no longer travel to Siberia for your summer vacation.
That's true. That's true. But I thank you for your apology. Is it okay to drink the water, you think? Yeah, okay. Why don't you explain, I think everyone here, when you hear Bill Browder's name, you immediately associate it with Sergei Magnitsky and the very powerful Magnitsky Act. But I don't know that if everyone who's watching on the live feed knows exactly what that is. If you could give like a 30-second.
Sure. So I was once the largest foreign investor in Russia. I discovered massive corruption in the companies I invested in. I exposed it. That, of course, made Putin and the people around him very mad. They expelled me from the country, declared me a threat to national security, raided my offices, seized my documents, used those documents to steal $230 million of taxes that I paid. I hired a young lawyer named Sergei Magnitsky to investigate. He exposed the crime. He testified against the officials involved. Those same officials then arrested him, tortured him, and killed him 358 days later. And I've now devoted my life to getting justice for Sergei Magnitsky. And I've succeeded in getting some small measure of justice. In the United States in 2012, the Senate voted 92-4 to pass the Magnitsky Act. The House of Representatives voted 89%, signed into law on December 14th, 2012 by President Obama. The Magnitsky Act now sanctions 49 individuals who are involved in either killing, torturing, or other things connected to Sergei Magnitsky or more broadly, other terrible abuses in Russia. It imposes visa sanctions, asset freezes, and publicly names the names of those people. It applies globally now. The Canadian government has a Magnitsky Act. The British government has a Magnitsky Act.
Go on, but there are more countries, right?
The Latvian government has a Magnitsky Act. The Lithuanian government has a Magnitsky Act. The Estonian government has a Magnitsky Act. And just a couple weeks ago, without my knowledge, the Gibraltar government passed a Magnitsky Act.
So why is that act important? How is it effective? Does it make a difference?
So the Magnitsky Act is, after Sergei was killed, I first tried to get justice inside of Russia. And in Sergei's case, he wrote 450 complaints during his 358 days in detention, detailing and documenting everything that happened to him. And although those complaints were never acted on by the authorities, we got copies of them. And because we have copies of those complaints, we had the most granular, detailed record of human rights abuse that's come out of Russia in the last 35 years. And because of that, I would have thought, and I tried to get justice in Russia. And the Russian authorities, Putin,
had no interest in providing any justice. And Putin personally got involved in exonerating everybody who played a role. The Russian government gave promotions and state honors to some of the people who were most complicit. And in the most shocking travesty of justice, they prosecuted Sergei Magnitsky 3 years after they killed him in the first ever posthumous trial in the history of Russia. So with no possibility of getting justice inside of Russia, I said, how do we get justice outside of Russia? And then I discovered something terrible, which is that there are no mechanisms to get justice outside Russia or outside a country that does these things if the entire government in these countries is corrupt. And so I said, if there's no measures to get justice, then I want to create my own. And I came to Washington, and I told this story of what happened to Sergei to Senator Benjamin Cardin and Senator John McCain. And I said, can we get a piece of legislation passed that freezes the assets and bans the visas of the people who killed Sergei Magnitsky? And in October of 2010, they introduced into the political process the Magnitsky Act. And as soon as they introduced it, their phones started lighting up from other victims. And people calling in from Russia saying, you found the Achilles heel of the Putin regime.
Which is money.
Which is money.
Right.
So their assets. Can you get the people who killed my brother, my father, my sister? And so they added 65 more words onto the law, which broadened it out to all bad guys in Russia. And
can you do that in 65 words?
Yeah, they did it in 65 words. And then everybody fanned out across Capitol Hill, all sorts of other victims and opposition figures, and including
how tough was it? So what's fascinating to me, and one of the reasons I think you're a hero, is not only because you did this, you had this idea, but you then executed on it, right? Everyone's, to accomplish anything, you need a vision and you have to execute. Any business person knows that. Any effective public servant knows that. Describe a little bit of what some of the obstacles were to getting it passed here and in other countries.
So the biggest odds, I've always told the joke that it was not that hard to get passed because there was no pro-Russian torture and murder lobby in Washington.
There's not?
Or there wasn't when I was working on it. But let me just say something that it was not that there was one big obstacle at the time, which was that President Obama had just declared a reset with Russia, and the reset with Russia was effectively let's not complain about anything that they do, and so the U.S. The Obama administration was the main obstacle. They were saying, listen, Bill, we have all the tools necessary. We think it's terrible what's happened, but we don't think this is the right time and the right thing to do, and so on and so forth. And Senator John Kerry, who was head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he was the one who had the deciding role of what piece of legislation could be considered by his committee, and there was all sorts of stuff. Everything that was behind us jumped ahead of us and just kept on jumping ahead, and it just kept on being stalled. And it was only when there was another piece of legislation that the White House wanted passed, which was the repeal of the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which was a historic piece of human rights legislation, which the Obama administration wanted rid of, that we had an opportunity, because they started going to the senators and saying, hey, could you vote to repeal this piece of historic, obsolete human rights legislation? And I got to my senator friends and I said, listen, it would be horribly unfair to repeal the most resonant piece of human rights legislation about Russia on the books without and stalling Magnitsky at the same time. And they agreed, and that was what pushed it through.
Do you have information or anecdotal evidence that this kind of thing really does cause the oligarchs to chafe and be upset and be immobilized?
I've got the best. So Putin is not a great poker player, and he shows his cards. And he showed his cards very well in this situation. So when the Magnitsky Act was first put out there, and going into the vote, Putin actually wrote he had a foreign policy white paper, and where he said that stopping the Magnitsky Act was the single largest foreign policy priority. After the Magnitsky Act was passed, Putin reacted hugely emotionally, And he banned the adoption of Russian orphans. And I should point out disabled Russian orphans, the sick ones that Americans were adopting, effectively sentencing his own orphans to death. And then, of course, the most important piece of anecdotal information happened on the 9th of June 2016, when Putin's lawyer or emissary, Natalia Veselnitskaya, went to Trump Tower and met with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort with one request, which was to repeal the Magnitsky Act. So we know that Putin cares about it. And then also there was another one. When the Canadians passed the Magnitsky Act, Putin was asked at the Valdai Forum, this forum of discussion with Putin among academics and journalists, and he was asked about the Canadian Magnitsky Act, and he went into this 5-minute monologue just personally insulting me and calling me every name and everything about it. And you could just see that his face was just, his forehead and everything. You just tell that we got under this guy's skin. And so this is the policy that works for Putin and for his corrupt regime.
And what about in other countries? Was the process more difficult or less?
So in a sense, the process was easiest in the United States because of the way that the Constitution is written, that the legislative branch has the same power as the executive branch if they all work together, and so it actually, in spite of the opposition by the administration, the legislative branch wanted to do it 92-4. However, in parliamentary democracies, like in Canada and the UK, in Canada it took us 7 years to get it done as opposed to 2 years, because if you can find your members of parliament that want to do it, but if they're in the governing party, no government wants to do this. There's not a government in the world.
You think it's because they have a trade deficit with us? Is that?
So, yeah, I think that might be.
Sorry. Could we talk about what's next? So there are a lot more countries in the world. There are a lot more places where people have their money. What are the top priorities for you?
Well, I'm a guerrilla warrior when it comes to Magnitsky legislation. I don't have a big team. There's only about 10 of us, and so we kind of try to see either where we either have so it's either low effort, high impact, or high effort and amazing impact. And so my single largest target right now is France. Why France? Because there's not a single member of the Putin regime that doesn't have a villa in Saint-Tropez, Cap Ferrat, or Cap d'Antibes. And so that's a heavy lift, France, because there's a lot of people who don't want to do this. But if I could get France...
But that's why, because they like keeping those people happy? Well, they like having the money?
I think that it's been confusing for me, but there's sort of, there's a lot of people that are just taking the money, and that's not easy. I'm also working on Australia. It's easy. Anglo-Saxon countries are easier for me because I can speak the language, and that helps. I'm going up to Sweden next week. We're having parliamentary hearings, Magnitsky hearings in Parliament in Sweden on Wednesday next week.
Is there another country where you're on the cusp of success?
Well, I think the closest country for success is Ukraine. Ukraine has a Magnitsky Act going through their parliament. They're obviously not friends of Russia. I'm not sure exactly where it is in the parliamentary process, but I think it's very likely that we'll get it. And then I just heard today that Vladimir Kara-Murza, who many of you know and is a good friend of our efforts and an amazingly heroic figure, was in Denmark. He had one meeting with the Danish parliament, and apparently there's a piece of Magnitsky legislation currently being drafted in Denmark. And so and who knows? And if anyone has any ideas, any country.
There's a lot of countries.
Yeah, there's a lot of countries out there, and so my ultimate goal is to have a standardized global piece of Magnitsky legislation that's implemented by every member of the United Nations, that applies to every human rights violator out there, that's exercised liberally, so that bad guys can't get away with being bad without real consequences.
Is Putin putting personal pressure to bear on leaders in these other countries where these matters are pending?
He's putting pressure on the leaders. He's putting pressure on the people. To give you an example, I was in Ireland in 2013. And Ireland is another country that's fairly easy for me to communicate with because of language and also the general cultural situation over there. And so I went to Ireland, and they're a real sort of good and evil, black and white type of country, and they like heroes, and they like Sergei Magnitsky, and I had everybody in the Irish parliament fully committed to this thing. And then the Russian ambassador made an announcement to say that he would ban, or Russia would ban, Irish adoption of Russian orphans, and the whole effort collapsed. And so they'll do everything. And there's not a consistent way that they go about doing this stuff. Sometimes they do it in a subterranean way. Sometimes they do it openly and overtly. They don't really
Is
care.
anyone committing any crimes in connection with...
What's that?
Is anyone committing any crimes in connection with preventing this legislation from being passed?
Are they committing crimes? Oh yeah, they're committing lots of crimes. So one of the most important crimes is that there are a number of people who are potentially on the Magnitsky list, that actually are on the Magnitsky list, that are spending money in countries that don't have Magnitsky lists to lobby using cash that I would assume is tainted from this crime to stop them being put on the Magnitsky list. And we found that being done in the UK and in Europe by members of people who have already been sanctioned.
Wow. That says 0.
That says 0.
So I don't know if that means...
We've already ran out of time. That's not fun.
Thank you, Bill. Really.